Let's get right down to business then. I'm really thrilled today to have with us Senator James Talarico of Texas. Many of you know him from the rounds he's been making on media talking about politics and how politics should look. Is a seminarian himself, but I don't think we pay enough attention to the fact he is also a former public school teacher. And my guess is that that has had something to do with his political journey. So, welcome, Senator, and please tell us why you decided to go into politics.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm a huge fan of your work and this platform, and it's an honor to be here. Well, before I was a politician, I was a public school teacher, as you mentioned. I taught sixth grade language arts on the west side of San Antonio, which is a beautiful, historic Mexican American neighborhood. It's also one of the poorest zip codes in the entire state of Texas. So every day, my students struggled heroically to overcome poverty, overcome racism, overcome systems that were designed to hold them back. And I was in the classroom right after the legislature here in Texas cut more than $5 billion from our public schools. This was in the wake of the Great Recession. And so I saw the impact of those cuts firsthand on my students and my fellow teachers and the members of the community on the West Side. And at one point, I had 45 kids in one classroom. There weren't enough desks for all those kids, so I had students sitting on the air conditioning unit in the wealthiest country in human history in the 21st century, children sitting on the air conditioning unit. And it got me mad, and I decided to do something about it. And that's what led me to the legislature and what's now leading me to run for the United States Senate.
So, I want to talk to you about Jimmy Carter and the way he talked about religion and politics together. But what's really jumping out about the way you're talking is not Jimmy Carter so much as LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, whose road to changing American society came exactly as yours has done through a public school position in which he recognized that his students were terribly underserved. Is that a model for you at all, or is that just coincidence?
Well, another coincidence is that this Senate seat that I'm running for is LBJ's Senate seat. And as a big fan of Lyndon Johnson and the Great Society, I consider it a real honor to be running for his Senate seat. And I think we need that kind of bold ambition in public policy once again. I feel like on both sides of the aisle, but including in my own party, the Democratic Party, we've set our sights too low. We're no longer talking about eliminating poverty, no longer talking about building the great society and truly having a country as big as our dreams. And so I hope we can all take some inspiration from LBJ and the ambition he had to improve the lives of working people.
Well, amen to that. But one of the things that you have done when you talk about American politics is to introduce a different way to think about the role of religion in our political system in this moment. And I'd love to hear you talk more about that and how you see that, because of course you are in a red state. You are pushing back against the use of evangelical Christianity in the radical right to impose policies like the ones you just talked about. How do you see the relationship between religion and politics?
Well, my faith is the reason I'm in public service. My granddad was a Baptist preacher in South Texas. I've been going to the same Presbyterian church since I was 2 years old. I'm now a student in seminary studying to become a minister myself one day, as you mentioned. And so my faith is everything to me. And, Jesus gave us these two commandments. It's what my granddad taught me when I was little. It's what my church raised me to always follow these two commandments to love God and love neighbor. And that second one is interesting because Jesus didn't tell us to love our immediate family members or our close friends or the members of our tribe. He asked us to love our neighbors, and he defined that very broadly. And that's a public thing. And so that's what led me to public service, first as a public school teacher and now as a public official. And so I'm very open about talking about how my faith influences my politics, my service, and the policies that I fight for at the state capitol, and hopefully the policies I'll fight for in the United States Senate.
Um, You may or may not have seen today the Pope has handed down his first major statement, and it talks exactly as you're talking about. It talks about love and loving your neighbor. What does that mean for a political party, though? Because of course, our country is supposed to be founded on the separation of church and state, and you have spoken out about that in
I have.
Texas.
I
Go
have.
ahead.
I was raised to believe that the separation of church and state is a sacred boundary. And it's one that Christians throughout Texas history and American history have fought for, because that separation doesn't just benefit the state, it benefits the church. The protections go both ways. When religion gets too cozy with political power, it loses its prophetic voice and its ability to speak truth to that power. And so that separation is something that we have to honor. I have, though, clarified that a separation of church and state is not the same thing as a separation of faith and politics. You know, we all bring our moralities and our philosophies to our politics, and faith is really no different. My faith shapes my politics, and I hope it shapes the politics of every person of faith, regardless of what tradition you belong to. Just like it did for Jimmy Carter, just like it did for Dr. King and Cesar Chavez and Dorothy Day and Mr. Rogers. We are called to bring our values to the public square, but that cannot be used to force our beliefs or our doctrines on people by government force. That's where we have to draw the line. And that institutional separation of church and state is so important to honor.
Can you go back a step and talk again about what you said at the very beginning when you were talking about faith? And that was that the religion is hurt by the insertion of politics too, because you lose your ability to talk authoritatively to power. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, you know, religion at its best, Christianity at its best, challenges the powers that be. Um, we've also seen Christianity used to benefit the people in power throughout history. But it's important to remember that our calling as Christians is the demolition of domination. It's why Christians spoke out against abolition, or I'm sorry, against slavery. Some of the first abolitionists were Christian activists. It's why people of faith spoke out against Jim Crow, against the empire, against the feudal system. That really is what we're called to do today. And we're not able to do that if our church or people of faith are in bed with the people in power, which happens way too often and has happened throughout history. So it's important to respect that boundary. Again, I don't mean to say that faith should be apolitical. I'm not even sure if there is such a thing as being apolitical. Our faith should move from the sanctuary to the streets. It should help us change the world around us. But that's not the same thing as that institutional blurring of church and state. That separation in our First Amendment is something we have to fight for every day.
It sounds as if what you're saying is that faith brought to the public sphere should always question power and should always reinforce the individual value of every human being.
That's right.
Whereas often when faith gets inserted or when religion gets inserted into politics, it works to shore up power and works to discriminate against people rather than treating them all equally. Am I putting too many words in your mouth?
No, that's exactly right. I've always said there's a difference between Christian activism and Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism is dominating our neighbors instead of loving them as ourselves. It is the elevation of our faith tradition over all the rest, which again is a very unchristian-like thing to do. If you go back and read the New Testament, so many of Jesus's parables are about the outsider, the outcast, the person who's different. And in fact, the hero of many of Jesus's stories is someone outside of his own faith. The Good Samaritan, maybe the most famous parable of Jesus's, is not just about helping people on the side of the road, which is how we think about it today. A Samaritan was not just someone from a different religious group, it was actually the sworn enemy of Jesus's people, the Jewish people. And the Samaritan is the hero of that story. So, what Jesus is saying is that our neighbor love has to transcend religious boundaries. And so to have my fellow Christians in the state legislature pass bills like the kind that force every teacher to post the Ten Commandments in their classroom, the kind of bills that try to replace school counselors with untrained chaplains, the kind of bills that indoctrinate students at an early age with Christian Bible stories. Those are just antithetical, not just to our First Amendment, but to our Christian values. And so it's why I try to speak out against these Christian nationalist bills from a faith perspective, not just a constitutional perspective.
So it's interesting to me that you come from Texas because Texas, of course, has a long history and that your family is from there because Texas has a long history of the kind of populism you're talking about, which is informed by faith, but what is really focusing on is the good of society and the good of everybody in it. And I'm wondering how your vision of what politics should be like and perhaps what the Democratic Party should be like comes together. What does that look like? Is it some sort of a return to an older form of populism that is inspired by faith and principle and yet focuses on doing good for the society as a whole? Or are you moving in a different direction?
Well, that's certainly what it is for me. This is the Democratic Party is a big tent party with lots of different kinds of Democrats, and that's a good thing. But for me, it's very much influenced by my faith, and in our tradition, there is a healthy skepticism of concentrated wealth and concentrated power. And I was raised in that tradition, and it certainly informs my politics. I've said before that I don't really see politics as left versus right. I see it as top versus bottom. I see the way that the billionaire mega donors who have increasingly taken over our politics, how they intentionally divide us with their social media algorithms, with their cable news networks. They divide us by party, by race, by gender, by religion. So we don't notice that they're picking our pockets. We don't notice that they're closing our schools, defunding our healthcare, or raising taxes on all of us while they cut taxes for themselves. And to me, that is not only part of the legacy of the Democratic Party, but it is also a legacy of the Christian religion.
So, where do you see the country going right now? I know you have spoken before about the spiritual crisis our country is in, and talked about ways that we, regardless of party, can address that crisis. How do you see American society as a whole right now?
Well, I think we've seen over the last few months, but certainly over the last few years, how the politics of division have really taken over our civic conversation. And we no longer are able to talk to each other past those disagreements. We increasingly see each other as enemies rather than as neighbors and fellow Americans. And there's no way a democracy can survive without that spiritual commitment to one another. Um, Democracy is very much a spiritual exercise. It's not just a form of government. It really is a commitment that we have to our neighbors, especially our neighbors who are different from us, especially our neighbors who disagree with us on important issues. And unless we have that moral commitment to each other, there's no way we can continue this American experiment. And so I'm, as an elected official, as a candidate, but also as a seminarian, I'm trying to speak to that spiritual dimension of our democracy so that we can continue this experiment in self-governance.
What would you tell people that they should do in this moment and going forward to protect democracy and to protect American civic life?
Well, I will go back to the commandment that I started with, which is the commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. And again, that isn't limited to the neighbors who look like you. It's not limited to the neighbors who pray like you. It's not limited to the neighbors who vote like you. It is inclusive of all of your neighbors, whether they live right next to you or whether they live on the other side of the country or the other side of the world. And and so we have to think: are we truly loving our neighbors? Are we loving our neighbors who have different ideas than we do? Are we loving our neighbors who have ideas that we consider reprehensible? Because that is the challenging love that I think we're all called to. not as religious people or as Christians, but as Americans in this American democracy. And that is not easy to do. I struggle with it every single day as an elected official, as a member of the legislature. I'm sure other folks listening to this conversation struggle with it too. But it is a challenge to all of us. And I honestly think it is the only way forward if we're going to save this project called democracy.
And I would argue that democracy includes work, that it's hard work, but it is joyful work, and it is work that contributes to the national muscle so that we are able to continue it. But what does that look like for people to love each other? Like if people are listening to this and they're thinking, I'm really concerned about the way the world is right now, I'm scared, I don't like turning on the news, they want to do something. What should they be doing?
Well, love is a verb. It's an action, and so that kind of love can look very differently. All of us have a gift to give. I really do believe that, and that gift is going to be different for each of us. It may be as a candidate for office. It may be as a historian. It may be as someone who goes out and volunteers, or someone who registers voters, or someone who tries to show small acts of kindness to people that you come across in your daily life. Those gifts can be big or they can be small, but no gift of love is ever wasted. And I do believe that these ripple effects from those acts of love, there's something sometimes we don't ever see come to fruition, but those ripples spread out from each of those small acts, and I do believe it changes the world ultimately. And that's what we're all called to do every day of our lives. And it's not easy. It's a straight and narrow path that's sometimes hard to walk, but it is one that I think all as Americans and as people in the world, we're all called to walk that path together.
I love that you are running for LBJ's seat, and I love the way that you are bringing together the populism that defined Texas in the late 1890s as a different kind of politics and a different kind of masculinity, by the way. The populists in Texas were very careful to say there are many ways to be an American, and bullying and yelling and screaming is not the one that we want to have here in Texas. And of course, that's what gave birth to LBJ, and that's what gave birth to the Great Society. So thank you for doing what you're doing and being a different kind of voice in this moment.
Well, thank you for what you do. I'm so inspired by your work, and I know there's a lot of love that goes into the work that you do, and I think we can all feel that. So thank you, and really honored to be here.
Well, a lot of love and a lot of work, and I think that's what we're all doing is rolling up our sleeves. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you'll come back sometime and we can dig deeper into some of these issues.
I would love that.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks.